As soon as the man stepped out, the slaves ran around looking for shoes. Suddenly, a girl ran up holding a pair of shoes. She said she was afraid of getting her shoes wet, hence the rush. Mr. Wang looked at her for a moment and asked who she was. The girl, sheltered under the rain, pleaded with him to let her stay. With the clear sky today, the girl came to Mr. Wang's tent, and seeing the exhausted trainees, Ji.Woon, he carried tea to them. Mr. Wang, standing high above, observed all this. While at Mr. Wang's camp, Ji.Woon had mastered the art of archery. Ji.Woon now leads Mr. Wang's soldiers. Mr. Wang was never satisfied with his title. He always aspired to ascend higher, to become the king of Chao Lai. This ambition of Mr. Wang was understood by the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince sent someone to investigate thoroughly. Sun Yang was then dispatched to approach the Crown Prince. Sun Yang had no idea that her target was the Crown Prince. Quickly, the two became friendly like siblings. And one night before executing a secret campaign, a figure asked the messenger to arrange a meeting with the Crown Prince, to let the Crown Prince overthrow King Chao Lai. But as soon as the messenger spoke, an arrow pierced his chest, indicating there were spies beside both the Crown Prince and King Chao Lai. Mr. Wang instructed Sun Yang to inform the Crown Prince of a false location. He'd wait, then send soldiers to kill the Crown Prince. They'd frame the Crown Prince for salt smuggling, but to everyone's surprise, the Crown Prince did not go to the false salt trading location. Instead of going straight to Sun Yang's salt transactions, the informant messaged the Crown Prince. Thus, Sun Yang was captured. Sun Yang's arrest and detention greatly disturbed Mr. Wang. Only Sun Yang and the magistrate knew about this plan. The magistrate accused Sun Yang of treason, but Mr. Wang didn't believe it, because Sun Yang had grown up with him since childhood. The magistrate said, "Let's see." So they arranged a spy next to the Crown Prince. He gave Sun Yang a knife to assassinate the Crown Prince. Sun Yang was brought before the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince told Sun Yang to reveal the trading location. Sun Yang was nervously cutting the rope. She pressed the knife to the Crown Prince's neck, signaling silence. Sun Yang removed the cloth covering her head to reveal a green scarf. Both the Crown Prince and the mysterious figure signaled. It turns out Sun Yang is that mysterious figure, which means she has betrayed Mr. Wang. Because Sun Yang's mother was previously taken away by Mr. Wang for forced labor, Sun Yang and the Crown Prince staged a play together. Sun Yang pressured the Crown Prince for his subordinate's rescue location. Mr. Wang received this information early. He couldn't let Sun Yang go like this. He sent a spy to meet Sun Yang and told her to reveal the trading location. The rest he would take care of. All the actions of the spy were seen by the Crown Prince. The next day, Sun Yang revealed the trading address. The Crown Prince followed the direction. The spy thought his plan had succeeded. He rushed to a corner, releasing a pigeon with a secret message. But to everyone's surprise, the pigeon was caught and killed instantly. The Crown Prince dealt with the spy himself. Then, he sent another letter to Mr. Wang, stating the magistrate's forces were inadequate. They sought Mr. Wang's aid. The Crown Prince ordered his men to attack from all sides. Both sides thought they were ambushed, so they fought relentlessly. As both sides neared defeat, the Crown Prince's reinforcements arrived. A soldier of the Crown Prince told Sun Yang to take Mr. Wang's smuggled salt ledger. Sun Yang rushed into Mr. Wang's mansion, accusing the magistrate of betrayal. He caused the entire army to be annihilated. Mr. Wang hadn't reacted when Sun Yang mentioned the assassination department sending someone for evidence. WNG opened a secret compartment and took out the ledger. He suddenly asked why she was the only survivor after the troops were wiped out. Sun Yang immediately pointed her gun and said her life belonged to her master. Even if she dies, she must die by her master's hand. At that moment, soldiers outside shouted, "Assassination department is coming." He sent someone to inform the high officials to the palace. Soldiers gathered to halt the Crown Prince's entry into the palace. Even if it meant killing him, he wanted to launch the final battle within the palace. Wang informed the king, the Crown Prince died in a salt smuggling conflict with soldiers. The ailing king, planning to abdicate, heard the news, but hesitated between the Crown Prince and his brother, Wang. Now, with only Wang and the support of the high officials, the king decided to abdicate. At the succession announcement's climax, the Crown Prince burst forth, bypassing guards, presenting evidence against Wang's salt smuggling. Everyone was shocked. Wang claimed smuggling profits bribed the Yuan Dynasty to protect Chao Lai, demanding the king's self-execution. The king, of course, did not comply. Wang had great power and the backing of the Yuan Dynasty. Finally, the king chose a compromise solution, announcing the Crown Prince as heir and issuing a final order to pardon all of Wang's crimes. This nobleman was truly flexible. One moment he was vying for the throne with the Crown Prince, he was the first to turn around and bow to the new king. The new king truly hated to limit Wang's power and his faction. The new king hosted a banquet and enacted 12 laws. Wang led the opposition, and other officials also stood up against it. The king slammed the table, guards surrounding the banquet. He then announced recent investigation results on officials' crimes. Reading a list, he warned defying the ban on crimes would mean no pardon, prosecution per law. The officials fell in fear. Wang couldn't swallow this humiliation. As he spoke, the Yuan crown prince was en route to Chao Lai. The Yuan Dynasty's prime minister secretly instructed Wang to deal with the crown prince. Wang smirked. If the crown prince dies on Chao Lai, the king will have to abdicate to explain to the Yuan dynasty. The king pondered shielding the Yuan crown prince. Assigning a strong border general, Zhao, to command the army to escort. The crown prince knew this trip might not return, feeling extremely desperate and fearful, so deliberately slowed down the pace. Just entering Chao Lai, he immediately stopped to rest, citing poor health. At night, he had his servant wear his clothes while he disguised himself as a servant to flee. As he left, he met General Bichin, in charge of the escort. Nowhere to hide, he had to sneak into any random quarters, and that quarters happened to be Sun Niang's. Sun Niang had previously betrayed Wang. Therefore, she assumed a false name and joined Jiao's army. When she caught someone lurking, she yanked them out and aimed to lock them up in the horse stable. The prince had never experienced such hardship before, so he revealed his true identity to Sun Niang. But Sun Niang, not believing him, pushed him into a pile of horse dung, enraging the real prince. By midnight, Zhao went to check and found that the Yuan escort had disappeared without a trace. As he wondered, bandits arranged by Wang attacked. They quickly broke through the defense line, clearly heading straight for the prince's tent. Sun Yang arrived first and found the person on the bed was the servant she'd met before. She told the servant to remove the prince's clothes and flee quickly. Enemies came fast, servant killed, mistaken for prince. The task of eliminating the ruthless bandits fell to Bichin, the escort leader. He couldn't report to the prime minister about examining the body to confirm it wasn't the prince. Sun Yang also informed Zhao that the deceased wasn't the prince. Both sides began secretly searching, with Bichin being the first to discover the prince. And Sun Yang also realized that it was indeed the prince she had encountered the previous night. At this moment, the prince was pleading for Bichin to spare his life. Knowing that all were Wang's orders, Bichin found himself in a dilemma. He instructed the prince to hide in a hollow log but still brandished his sword. Sun Yang also aimed an arrow at Bichin. Just then, someone arrived with orders that King Chaoli had arrived, and Bichin immediately submitted. But he still reported to King Chaoli that the prince had died and the Yuan would demand accountability from him. Zhao claimed it was a false death, and the prince was still alive. The king wanted to see the body, but Bichin wouldn't allow it. As tensions rose, Jiao's deputy pulled the prince in, leaving Bichin unable to justify further, and King Chaoli temporarily avoided a disaster. The king asked who found the prince. Byung-su lied that he found him, but it was actually Sam Nyang. Byung-su wanted recognition, so he brought the prince to the tent. The king, unaware, promised a reward to Byung-su. Sun Yang stood aside, realizing that the one she had helped wasn't a courtier but the king himself. The king personally led the procession to safely escort the prince to the capital. Afterward, he ordered Zhao to increase protection, keeping anyone away. Byung-su awaited the king's praise, but the one important was Sun Niang. During the conversation with the prince, the king realized Sun Niang was the one who found him. Byung-su was important in the royal court and was angry, leading Sun Niang to meet the king. At this point, no one knew that Sun Niang was a woman. The king, recognizing Sun Niang from before, embraced her, impressed by her talent. He asked Sun Niang to protect the prince. Reprimanded, Byung-su became a spy for the royal family, aiming for military promotion. Byung-su's first task assigned by the royal family was to kill the prince. Although Sun Niang always stood by the prince's side, there was always a gap. While Sun Niang was bathing, Byung-su sneaked into the bedroom and heard her running in. She wounded his hand, and the man fled. He escaped, changed, and smoothly joined the assisting guards. The next day, a high official named Zhao sent many people to search for the assassin, but no results were found. The next day, the big man whose name was Zhao sent many people to search for the assassin but to no avail. After ordering the army, Zhao called Sun Niang privately. It turned out that the day before, after bathing, Sun Niang accidentally dropped her mother's ring, which Zhao found. He immediately recognized Sun Niang as the child he had been searching for. Zhao wanted to adopt Sun Niang as his own, but she refused. Because if they married, Sun Niang would have to reveal her identity. As a woman who escaped slavery, this could affect Zhao. So Sun Niang just wanted to maintain the current situation, staying by her father's side as a guard. The assassination attempt made the prince feel more threatened, so he asked Sun Niang to teach him martial arts, and their relationship grew closer day by day to the point where the prince doubted his own gender. Byung-su, skilled in flattery, knowing that the emperor wanted to rebel, called him the master. The emperor laughed, pointing out the one to lead officials in killing the prince. If successful, I will appoint you as the general. That night, Byung-su led the Qing army secretly across the sea to attack. Sun Niang led the prince to escape to the mountains, planning to return to the capital. The Qing army, trailing closely, swiftly found the prince and Sun Niang amidst the large group. At the cliff's edge, Sun Niang told the prince to leap to the opposite mountain peak. But due to the dangerous terrain, Sun Niang hesitated until the Qing army surrounded them. Sun Niang encouraged him, saying that if he wanted to survive and become emperor, he must be brave to jump. Sun Niang decided to jump with him, but they fell into the river below the mountain. Sun Niang woke up in the water, dodging arrows shot at them. She pulled Sun Niang ashore. Luckily, he was still alive. Seeing Sun Niang's body cold, Sun Niang took off his clothes to warm him up. That night when Jael woke up and found Sun Niang holding him, his heart unexpectedly beat strongly. Jael quickly shook his head to dispel strange thoughts, wondering how he could love another man. The Qing army searched in vain as the emperor of the Qing dynasty passed away. The will favored the prince, but the regent desired a puppet ruler. So, he personally went to Chao Lai to confirm the prince's death. He continued to hunt the prince while wanting to use the prince's remains to threaten King Chao Lai. If Jael also died, the Qing Empire would belong to him. The regent considered himself an emperor and didn't respect Wang. Under Wang's protection, he couldn't repel the invaders from beyond Chao Lai, witnessed enemies from outside invading Korea but couldn't do anything themselves. Wang Yiwu felt extremely distressed. After enduring hardship, Sun Niang and the prince reached the capital, discovering that everyone here was from the royal court. If caught, they would surely be secretly executed. They needed to let everyone know that the prince was still alive. Only then could the prince ascend the throne. Sun Niang planned to conceal the prince in a coffin under salt and water droppings. Then, she went to find Byung-Su and told him that she had found the prince's body. Byung-Su wanted to be recognized, so he went with Sang Yang to check. Opening the coffin, the foul odor made him struggle to turn the prince's face upward. Once confirmed the deceased was the prince, he quickly unmasked, arrested Sun Niang, and took the body to claim the throne. Meanwhile, a court session unfolded in the palace, under the threat of the Qing regent to protect the people from disaster. King Chao Lai admitted that he had killed the prince, begging the regent not to harm the innocent. At that moment, Byung-Su entered the palace to report finding the prince's body. The regent ordered his two sons to check. The foul stench from the coffin overwhelmed them. The second son instructed General Bichin to inspect it. Bichin moved the prince's nose slightly, coughed once, and General Bichin knew he wasn't dead. The regent's son also felt something was wrong. Approaching Bichin, he grimaced at the putrid smell, briefly covering his nose. Right after, the body was brought into the Great Hall, where all officials gathered. As the regent feigned sorrowful tears, the prince suddenly rose to his feet. The regent inquired what had occurred, but the prince was speechless. Sun Niang demanded the prince to speak the truth. Only then could the regent not threaten Chao Lai. General Bichin, by the prince's side, signaled absolute silence. If he spoke, it would directly confront the regent, which meant death. The prince, unsure what to do, could only pretend to faint to avoid the situation. The regent's two sons' failure to act made him furious. He drew his sword to punish them. Wang advised the regent to calm down. At that moment, the eldest son suggested immediate regicide. The regent dismissed it as foolish, warning that killing the prince meant eliminating all witnesses. After the regent left, Bichin woke the prince, informing him of the emperor's death, and he would ascend to the throne, arranging his final steps. In the evening, everyone gathered again. The regent asked the prince who was plotting against him. The prince, confused, said that King Chao Lai had sent someone to kill him. Sun Niang felt angry and disappointed. Zhao, her father, had saved an ungrateful person. After his words, the prince turned away. Sun Niang was imprisoned, Jiao's betrayal evident through her wound. At this point, the hatred in Sun Niang reached its peak. She swore to kill Guyan. Guyan, following the bodyguard's instructions, begged the regent for mercy and promised loyalty to many kings. Seeing Guyan like this, the regent suddenly changed his mind. Instead of seizing power by himself, he decided to suffocate Guyan's power. He would become emperor after the mourning period. The regent promised to support Guyan's ascension but demanded he marry his daughter as queen. The next day, at the regent's behest, Guyan eliminated the king of Wang. The regent returned Wang to the Nguyen family for trial, while demanding Chao Lai to compensate materially and submit the girl. Wang's uncle punished Sun Niang by adding her to the candidates for return to the Nguyen family. On the way back to the Nguyen family, Wang clashed with the Nguyen guards. To protect a woman, he was severely injured and no one wanted to take care of Wang. Only Sun Niang dragged him along the way. Everyone thought Sun Niang was a loyal official. Sun Niang's beauty made Kim Hyuan suspect she was a woman, and in the evening, he stripped Sun Niang to confirm this. Then, he prepared to accept her as his concubine. Sun Niang refused Kim Hyuan's coercion, but King Chao Lai intervened and knocked Kim Hyuan unconscious. Both of them were then tied up. King Chao Lai only realized Sun Niang was a woman then. Amidst their shared misfortune, they found solace in each other. That night, Wang's four subordinates secretly infiltrated the military camp to set fire, creating chaos to rescue Wang and Sun Niang, but they failed miserably and were also captured by the Nguyen army. The next day, King Chao Li's schedule was changed. He was forced to go to the border to fight with the Turks. Sun Niang was taken to Daidu because she refused to become Kim Hyuan's concubine, so she was placed in the palace as a low-ranking court lady. These women undressed, awaiting selection for the palace. The first woman, with high cheekbones and a plump face, was eliminated. The second woman, with a balanced figure but a pained expression, was also rejected. The third woman, beautiful and well-proportioned, awaited her turn, but the palace staff discovered a scar on her arm, which was the reason for her rejection. However, a court official next to her took her hand and remarked that the mark on her palm indicated that this woman would become the mistress of the palace. Looking closely at her face, although a woman, she exuded dignity. The court official accepted her as a low-ranking court lady. Her fate now rested in her hands. Step by step towards the queen's throne, Sung Yang was immediately assigned a higher-ranking woman, John, to serve upon entering the palace. John demanded a foot massage, slapping Sung Yang when the pressure was too much. Sung Yang, a former soldier, couldn't tolerate humiliation. Her gaze at John turned murderous. John ordered the court ladies to take Sung Yang to the storage room. Sung Yang defeated all the court ladies. John wielded a whip at her, but Sung Yang grabbed the whip and subdued her. Sung Yang had faced life and death. Even John, a noble, couldn't do anything to her. She didn't want to harm her colleagues, so no one dared to provoke Sung Yang. In days, the emperor's wedding, 1 or 2 candidates per room watching. Sung Yang told John she wanted to go and watch. After witnessing Sung Yang's strength the previous day, John didn't dare to be arrogant anymore and agreed. Later, when Sung Yang went to the kitchen to fetch water, she secretly took a knife. She was preparing to assassinate Jael during the wedding to ensure she could kill him with just one blow. Sung Yang even applied snake venom to the blade. On the wedding day, Sung Yang stood among the court ladies, seeing the emperor just a step away. She was preparing to draw her knife and charge, but a large hand was placed on her shoulder. It was Kim Hyun, the son of the former prime minister who had favored Sung Yang. Now, Sung Yang's focus was solely on assassinating the emperor, but her plan was thwarted. The emperor and empress sat on the golden throne, cheered and praised by the people. Only Sung Yang remained weeping for her father, whom the emperor had unjustly killed. She silently vowed to kill this treacherous emperor. Returning to her chambers, Sung Yang accidentally dropped her knife from her sleeve, immediately noticed by Jaeon. Jaeon quietly informed the palace guards, and that night Sung Yang was apprehended. Under interrogation, Sung Yang admitted only to hiding the knife for self-defense. She refused to become his concubine after he murdered her mother. Hearing the bitterness in Sung Yang's words, the guards surprisingly pardoned her, but still punished her by beating her legs. The Empress was cruel enough to prevent Empress Ki from conceiving. She feigned kindness by sending Empress Ki a lavish incense burner, when smelled for a long time, could cause infertility in women. Despite this, the Empress still felt unsafe. On their wedding night, the Empress told the Emperor not to let Empress Ki conceive while they shared the same chamber. Otherwise, the former Prime Minister's family would seize power. The Emperor avoided sharing a bed with Empress Ki, ignoring the Empress's instructions. Though beautiful, the thought of her father being the former Prime Minister extinguished any desire in him. The Emperor entered. She adjusted her attire. The Emperor glanced over and immediately recognized her little trick, yet the Empress remained there, feigning allure. As the Emperor quietly drank wine, the impatient Empress Ki, the Emperor, finding her waiting in bed, promptly retired for the night. He praised the Empress's beauty, making her believe that tonight might be successful. After speaking, the Emperor unexpectedly fell asleep instantly. News of Empress Ki's mistreatment on their wedding night spread fast. Quickly spread, much to the delight of the Empress. Feeling it wasn't enough, she instructed the palace to spread this news. However, Empress Ki was not easily provoked. On the first day after the wedding, she didn't greet the Empress. The Empress ordered the palace to inform the consorts. Morning meeting called to address Empress Ki's behavior. Empress Ki didn't attend, forming her own faction. Summoning the palace managers to hold a separate morning meeting, declaring herself as the mistress of the harem, not the Empress. The Empress, enraged, sought out Empress Ki to inquire about her offense. They met on the bridge, locked in a tense standoff, unwilling to yield. Backed by the powerful Prime Minister, Ki rendered the Empress powerless. However, the Empress still had a venomous plan up her sleeve. The Empress addressed the palace maid after examining her closely. Tonight, you will serve the Emperor in his chambers. The Empress wanted this maid to conceive the Emperor's child first, not only to humiliate Empress Ki but also to shake her position. Fearing that Ki might use the Empress's scheme against her, the Empress instructed the palace to find a trustworthy nursemaid for the maid. The nursemaid from Chao Lai immediately reminded the palace of Sung Yang. Sung Yang saw this as an opportunity for the Emperor's assassination and agreed. The palace sent a stunningly beautiful maid in silk to the Emperor's chambers. Then, the palace and court officials stayed outside, listening for any commotion inside. The Emperor showed no interest, yet the Empress knelt outside, demanding that the Emperor must leave the air tonight. Only then could they confront the Prime Minister and Empress. Reluctantly, the Emperor agreed. At night, a eunuch discreetly escorted the maid out. Meanwhile, Sun Yang watched the sleeping emperor through a crack in the door, waiting for her next chance to assassinate him. There's no wall without cracks, and this news quickly spread among the palace maids. Coincidentally, the empress learned about this and summoned the maid for interrogation. The emperor and the empress grew suspicious of the maid from Chao Lai, the only one they knew to be favored, but soon realized this needed to end at its root. She personally inspected all the maids from Chao Lai, from their appearance to their demeanor. The maid, fearing discovery by the empress, was ordered outside and beheaded. As the guards prepared to take the maid away, the empress intervened, demanding her release. The empress didn't show any signs of weakness, even requesting the maid's head, asserting her father's power. The empress seemed somewhat hesitant to let the maid go, but suddenly showed signs of nausea, making everyone panic, as if they had found a lifebuoy. Hastily, she inquired whether the maid might be pregnant. The empress, upon discovery, ordered the maid's release. Her unborn child, descendant of the murdered family, rendered her akin to a traitor. The empress could only feel powerless anger. The prime minister swiftly entered the palace to confront the king's household. He even threatened that if the empress shed tears, this palace would turn into a sea of blood. He requested the king to remember this. The king, currently in a weak position against the prime minister's concerns, wandered in the palace. By chance, he encountered the palace maid Sun Yang and requested her to make tea for him and observe her closely. The king asked if Sun Yang had a brother because she resembled someone who had saved him before. Sun Yang said she did not. The king pondered on Sun Yang's past, seeing an opportunity. As he went for his dagger, aiming to stab the king, he froze when the king ordered him to stop. Then he approached her and pulled out a hairpin resembling a needle. The king remarked that such a crude pin could not be used as a hairpin, then immediately wanted to give Sun Yang a jade hairpin. Sun Yang hesitated, but the empress arrived, snatched the jade pin, and scolded. She accused him of wanting every woman in the palace. The empress was so angry because previously the king was courting another palace maid and gave her the jade pin she was wearing. The empress timely arrived, snatched the jade pin, and slapped the maid, then told the king that she would tell everything to her father. This frightened the king because the prime minister had great influence. To appease the empress, the king reluctantly visited her that night and spent the night, albeit unwillingly. The queen mother quickly heard of the empress serving the king. The queen mother told the king not to worry because the empress could not bear children. As long as the chief maid gave birth to a son, the empress would lose her power. The prime minister and the empress plotted to make the maid miscarry. The maid came from Chao Lai, and the serving maids were all her fellow Chao Lai villagers. The empress started with Chao Lai maids to find someone for risky tasks. She chose the leader, Yuan, and asked her to send a letter. The letter, from the empress, stressed the secrecy of a matter concerning someone's life, and no one should read its contents. Both frightened and curious, Yuan opened the letter and read its contents, causing her to panic. Being very clever, John jumped into the lotus pond. Then she returned to report to the empress that she stumbled and fell into the lotus pond, losing the letter, suggesting delegating the task to another person. The empress asked if she had secretly read the letter. The empress, skeptical, asked her to send another letter. John confessed, apologized hastily to the empress, who reminded her to stay silent, then dismissed her. This was actually a test. The empress was seeking someone loyal, and John's slip of tongue was inappropriate, and another courtier introduced Sun Yang to the queen. For a test, Sun Yang was assigned a letter. The guard, mentioning a rebellion plot, held a knife to her throat. Demanding she disclose the source of the letter, Sun Yang steadfastly refused. The guard swung down but only cut a strand of her hair. At this moment, the queen arrived and took Sun Yang away. She had passed the test. The queen didn't know Sun Yang had read the letter too. The letter's content of murder made Sun Yang frightened initially. She soon sensed a discrepancy. No conflict existed between her and the queen. The queen couldn't want to kill her, it could only be a test. When the guard lied that the letter contents related to a rebellion plot, Sun Yang believed even more that it was a test. And so, Sun Yang gained the queen's trust. And the queen assigned her a task. The queen instructed Sun Yang to secretly put abortion medicine in Bok's food, and wanted to witness Bok eating it herself. Under the supervision of the court, Sun Yang put abortion medicine in a cake batter. During the queen and Bok's afternoon tea, the queen put abortion medicine in the dessert, and invited a pregnant court lady to try a candlelit bite. Bok hesitated with her chopsticks, and the queen noticed to make Bok less suspicious. After taking a bite herself first, Bok had no reason to refuse and picked up a piece with honey apple filling. As the serving court lady informed Sun Yang that the honey wasn't laced with abortion medicine, only the queen innocently believed everything was drugged and trusted Sun Yang as her own. That day, when Sun Yang reported back to the queen's court, he was very pleased, only awaiting the day Bok accumulated poison and miscarried. As Sun Yang left, she was accidentally seen by Kim Hyen, the queen's elder brother, who immediately asked if Sun Yang was the one poisoning Bok. However, Kim Hyen knew Sun Yang couldn't harm her own people. Unconvinced by this story, to ensure He's plan didn't fail, he approached John, requesting her to poison Bok, promising John a promotion to serving court lady in return, and even the chance to become a courtier. John, allured by benefits, put medicine powder into the cake filling, watched Bok eat, and felt unwell, and that night, Bok had to urinate incessantly, making Sung Niang suspicious. The next day, Bok became weak. Sung Niang saw a serving courtier John quietly rejoicing, and immediately sensed something was wrong. She found a trusted eunuch to check on Bok and discovered the fetus was still there. She devised a plan, asking Bok to meet the queen and pretend to have abdominal pain. Seeing Bok clutching her stomach, the queen thought the abortion medicine had worked. The queen secretly called Sung Niang and requested her to spread rumors that Bok was only pretending to be pregnant to vie for favor. Sung Niang took advantage, hanging menstrual blood-stained underwear. A pregnant woman couldn't menstruate, causing a stir among the courtiers. Rumors of Bok's feigned pregnancy spread quickly and reached the empress's ears soon. Before the empress could clarify matters, the queen confidently sought her out to address the issue. The empress immediately recognized this as the queen's scheme. Unaware, she didn't realize Sung Niang had orchestrated everything, patiently awaiting the queen's fall. The empress asked the queen how she wanted to resolve the issue. The queen insisted on summoning the royal physician for clarity. The empress, fearing that the queen dared to do this, must have prepared meticulously, so she agreed not to re-examine. When the queen couldn't convince the empress, she immediately summoned Sung Niang to inquire about Bok's condition. Sung Niang said Bok had been feverish all night, lying in bed. Hearing this, the queen no longer hesitated. She quickly called the royal physician, alerting the king and empress. The three of them sat together, each with their own plans awaiting Bok. But Bok fainted on the way. At this point, the queen became more convinced that she was feigning. She kept professional but slammed the empress and king for favoring Bok. The king, angry, scolded the queen and told her she wasn't allowed to re-examine. The king left, leaving the disappointed queen behind. She saw this as a chance to strengthen her position and defeat the empress, refusing to give up easily. She requested the court to inform her father to force the king to re-examine. The prime minister awaited final confirmation. When Bok fainted, needing a physician to treat her, the royal physician scans the empress through a thin veil for pregnancy signs. The arm he rests on is a palace maid's, hidden beneath the platform. The physician fails to detect any signs of pregnancy and reports to the queen mother that the empress may not be pregnant. The queen mother trembles, realizing the unborn child in the empress's belly is her last hope. In controlling the empress and the prime minister, she warns the physician not to disclose the test results to the prime minister. After agreeing, the physician is swiftly taken to the prime minister's residence upon leaving the palace. Under threat, the physician hastily denies any signs of pregnancy in the empress. The prime minister keeps the news close, intending to use it against the queen mother. He allies with high officials in the court to send a letter to the king. Based on widespread rumors within and outside the palace that the empress faked her pregnancy, he requests a re-examination in front of all officials to clarify the truth. Initially, the king disagrees but cannot resist the prime minister's power. He threatens the king, suggesting expulsion from the palace alongside the queen mother. Finally, the king reluctantly issues the decree. The queen mother laughs outside the hall, discarding her crown and lavish attire. She begs the king to revoke the order. Beside her, the favored queen watches everything, unaware that, after the pulse examination, she will be the one kneeling down. The king hastily exits. Though the queen mother tries to intimidate him, he is powerless. Currently, in terms of power or rules, the king is inferior to the prime minister. The prime minister and the queen mother fiercely face off, leaving the king fleeing to find solace. Sung Niang, the sole keeper of truth, appears behind the king in that moment. Sung Niang, once planning regicide, has a change of heart after palace ordeals. She realizes she needs the king to deal with the cruel queen mother and prime minister. She tells the truth to the king, and the king devises a plan. The king, torn, concedes to the prime minister and queen mother's call for a re-examination. Shortly after, the prime minister and his faction boldly organize a pulse examination ceremony. Right at the venue for criminal trials, the king asks why they are here. The prime minister bluntly warns that if the false pregnancy is exposed, it's definitely not just the empress who will be apprehended, and her associates will also be tried. The examination commences, and this time the old physician detects signs of pregnancy. Emperor Hong Hot reluctantly agrees as the prime minister insists, with additional physicians confirming the pregnancy. Everyone present witnesses the reversal of fortune for both the queen mother and the empress. The queen mother stays composed, considering the incident a mockery of the royal family. Suspecting a false pregnancy, she demands punishment for the empress, who instigated the affair. The empress almost reveals the truth, but the prime minister swiftly shifts blame, admitting it was mere speculation and rumor. This time, the empress, clad in modest attire, apologizes outside the hall. That night, fearing the prime minister's wrath, the king seeks to pardon the empress. However, the queen mother persists, aiming for her ultimate advantage. She requests the king to elevate the maid to a high-ranking court lady. This ensures the maid's safety, secures the prince's birth, weakens the prime minister, and strengthens the royal family. It's a bid for ultimate power. The empress faints but is reinstated as a maid, now promoted to a high-ranking court lady. Sung Niang is promoted to a court maid, realizing she was deceived by Sung Niang's plot. The Empress is surprised when the king's men rescue her. The king discovers that Sun Yang was the one who saved him during the accident. He arranges for her to serve as his court maid, and a perplexing affection blossoms within the king. He begins to develop feelings for Sun Yang. However, Sun Yang loves the victorious King Chao Lai, who has returned from the border. This man not only captivates the attention of the palace maids upon his arrival, but also earns the affection of even the forgotten empress. When the man plays the instrument, the empress seems moved. But his heart is set on a court maid named Sun Yang. The two undergo life and death situations together as the king witnesses Wang and Shuang Yang exchange affectionate glances, feeling dismayed because he also loves Sun Yang. Wang just helped the king win the battle. At first, he wants to return to Chao Lai to restore his position, but the powerful prime minister refuses. A month later, the prime minister grapples with a new bloody crisis in the palace. Outside, there are also unclear origin announcements. When he sees black ink on the missing announcement and only a few red words remaining, both say that the prime minister will eventually be punished by lightning. This spreads widely among the people, angering the prime minister beyond control. He suspects it's an act of the king or the queen to challenge his power. So, he leads troops to besiege the palace, and just a few words make the king cry in fear. It seems the king is still as weak as before. The prime minister asserts that this isn't a plot by the king. Next, he surrounds the queen. The queen remains strong and straightforward as always. Mocking the prime minister's words, he storms out, but with doubts about who is challenging him, not even the queen. Returning home, heavy rain pours as more bloody letters appear. Enraged, the prime minister is lost as enemies lurk unseen. At this moment, Wang comes to the prime minister and presents a plan. He boldly tells the prime minister that just like when he held power and betrayed the former emperor, only close confidants dare challenge an old prime minister like him. Though humiliated, Wang's words are not wrong. A few days later, the prime minister calls Wang Yiwu and asks how to expose the traitor. Wang Yiwu offers a potion and suggests the prime minister's son to test it. This potion can make one appear dead. He tells the prime minister that if the traitor thinks the prime minister is dead, they will surely start acting. The prime minister can use this method to deceive everyone. Seeing this, the prime minister smiles and accepts Wang Yiwu's plan. Wang's plan involves borrowing the enemy's weapon, causing discord within the prime minister's faction. To let them self-destruct, then he will benefit. However, General Bichen and the strategist hide and eavesdrop, learning Wang Yiwu's plan. They immediately report to the king, who quickly devises a plan. General Bichen switches the wine, poisoning the prime minister. Thus, when the prime minister accuses Wang Yiwu, he will also be accused of killing two birds with one stone. The following day, the prime minister convened powerful individuals to discuss national matters. They raised their glasses. The prime minister even performed a sword dance to entertain the generals. Right after, he suddenly coughed up blood and collapsed. Wang Yiwu suddenly realized that it wasn't the antidote he provided, but someone had played dirty. The prime minister kept vomiting blood late into the night, with doctors unable to help. At that moment, the king arrives abruptly, taking in the chaos. He laughed strangely as their plan unfolded perfectly. That night, the prime minister struggled with death. The king and General Bichen arrived to arrest Wang Yiwu. Sun Yang wanted to follow Wang Yiwu, but the king stopped her. He wants Sun Yang to see how weak and helpless Wang Yiwu is compared to himself. After being arrested, Wang Yiwu firmly declares his innocence. He tells Kim Heil that the potion was tested and stored by Kim Heil himself. Clearly, he knows Wang Yiwu is not the culprit. Wang Yiwu suggests that they should go after the real traitor. Kim Heil doesn't care about that and still wants to kill Wang Yiwu. The queen rushes in and persuades her brother to release Wang Yiwu. Wang Yiwu's reasoning is not unfounded. Wang Yiwu agrees to catch the real culprit, honoring the prime minister's sacrifice. But in secret, he meets the queen, disclosing that he orchestrated all the announcements and bloody letters. In fact, there's no real traitor. Wang Yiwu aims to pit the prime minister's faction against itself, draining their resources. The queen asks him why he did this. Wang Yiwu hopes the court will change its oppressive policies toward Chao Lai and agrees to restore his title as King Chao Lai. The queen agrees, but the plan still lacks one final step. No one has challenged the power of the prime minister's family yet. He hopes the queen will promise General Bichen the position of prime minister's most trusted subordinate. To take the position of prime minister, General Bichen needs to defeat the prime minister's son, Kim Hyun. General Bichen is truly trapped. That night, Wang Yiwu gives Sun Yang a golden hairpin, inviting her to return to Chao Lai as his wife. If she agrees, she'll wear the hairpin tomorrow. The next day, Wang Yiwu sees Sun Yang wearing the hairpin, and they understand each other, filled with joy. Sun Yang tells Wang Yiwu that among the girls he freed years ago, her life has always belonged to Wang Yiwu from the beginning. She will only pursue him in this life. After speaking, they embrace tightly and spend the night together. Wang Yiwu and General Bichen feign loyalty to the Prime Minister's faction. At the Prime Minister's, they stumble upon Kim Hyan crying by coffin. Initially, it appears the Prime Minister only aimed to weaken his own faction, but now they decide to use this opportunity to destroy the Prime Minister's faction. That night, General Bichen's troops attack. Kim Hyan, Bichen, Wang Yiwu, and others were all standing on the city wall, preparing for the major battle. Meanwhile, Sun Niang saw the Empress's upper court carrying a bowl of sweet bean soup. Sun Niang remembered that the Empress was allergic to beans. Only the Prime Minister consumed this sweet bean soup daily. She quickly realized her father, the Prime Minister, was hiding in the Empress's bedroom. The so-called coffin was just to deceive everyone and reveal those who wanted to overthrow him. Sun Niang quickly ran to the base of the city wall and shot an arrow at a soldier. The arrow bore a white cloth, their agreed secret signal, signifying the Prime Minister's survival. Immediately, General Bichen and Wang Yu changed their plans, collaborating with Kim Hyan and the soldiers to attack the northern generals. To avoid suspicion from the Prime Minister's faction, despite the losses inflicted, the Prime Minister's faction remained unshaken. The next day, despite not being fully recovered, the Prime Minister presided over the rebellion trial, even arranging for false witnesses to accuse the Queen. The Queen was detained without evidence, but the investigation served as a warning. With the Queen detained, the northern faction lost the protection they wanted to overthrow her. The next day, the Queen vomited twice. The court ladies rejoiced, certain that the Queen was indeed pregnant, but when Dr. Y arrived, he did not find any signs of pregnancy, and said that the Queen couldn't conceive, which almost made her faint. If this news were to spread, it would be ridiculed. So, the Queen started stuffing her clothes to pretend to be pregnant. The pregnant woman from faction was about to give birth, making the Queen jealous. The Queen asked her brother, Kim Hyan, to kill the pregnant woman at the Buddhist ceremony. Kim Hyan felt uneasy, aware that a misstep could spell disaster for their family. Their father would disapprove, but the determined Queen insisted on the pregnant woman's death. Kim Hyan discreetly arranged for subordinates to pose as mountain bandits on the road. The pregnant woman arrived and sent her escort away, claiming she needed to use the toilet. At that moment, a palace maid named Sun Niang emerged from the sedan. 6 months prior, during the king's overthrow by Chao Lai, he impregnated Sun Niang. As a palace maid, this act was punishable by death. This time Bitch Ti's outing for the Buddha ceremony was to escort Sun Niang out of the palace. While Sun Niang and Bitch Ti were parting ways, the disguised bandits appeared, killing all the palace maids along with Bitch Ti. Sun Niang witnessed everything but could do nothing but flee into the forest. At this moment, the loyal attendants of the Queen arrived just in time, distracting the attention of the conspirators in another direction. On the way, Sun Niang slipped and rolled down the hill, her pregnant belly being jostled. She was on the brink of giving birth and had no choice but to find a cave to labor in. The baby born had 3 moles on its foot. Barely resting after birth, she heard the conspirators approaching, and Sun Niang had to carry the child on her back to continue fleeing. But this time, she had no escape route. Facing a sheer cliff, Sun Niang fiercely resisted but was shot by a conspirator with an arrow. Sun Niang, injured, lost her balance, and the child was pulled down the cliff, followed shortly by Sun Niang. Fortunately, Sun Niang was saved by others. Thanks to the bronze mirror gifted by the female official, the arrow posed no threat to her. Sun Niang returned to the cliff, searching for her child in the frantic night, but she only found the palace maids' corpses, weeping bitterly before Bitch Ti's hat. Desperate, Sun Niang went to where the robbers had struck. She buried the dead girls and cried in front of her uncle's hat. Upon hearing of Bitch Ti and Sun Mion's deaths, the king was profoundly saddened. The king, in anguish, suddenly lost his voice, a boon for the Prime Minister. He directly took the seal and assumed the role of regent. A few days later, the loyal attendants of Wang Yiwu returned, and tearfully told him the news of Sun Niang's death, manipulated by the Queen. Wang Yiwu was extremely sorrowful, never expecting to be separated forever after just a few months. With no reason to linger in Daiyuan, Wang Yiwu aimed to reclaim his throne in Chao Lai, so he had to use the excuse of his father's illness to return to Chao Lai for a trip. At this point, as the Queen's due date approached, she had to find a way to deceive everyone. She asked for a brief stay at the temple, feigning blessings for her unborn child. At the temple, she sought fertility treatment, but it was unsuccessful. The royal physician said even if the phoenix revived, it couldn't help the Queen conceive. The palace advisor urged the Queen to return, alleging a miscarriage, but the Queen refused, fearing that without a child, the king would marry more concubines. Daily, she endured the agony of fervent prayers for a child, praying to the Buddha for a child. At that moment, the cries of a baby made the Queen think she was hallucinating. She rushed outside and saw a monk holding a baby, saying the baby was found in a valley. The baby's father had died. The Queen hugged the baby and cherished it. She informed the palace advisor of a solution, then ordered the poisoning and burning of the temple and its monks. They returned to the palace with the baby in tow. Ignoring the 3 moles on the baby's foot, the Queen sat on the bed, screaming loudly. Everyone outside thought she was giving birth. In truth, a palace maid hastily smeared blood on herself to feign childbirth. As the moment approached, the palace advisor embraced the baby, declaring the birth of a prince. The palace maid swiftly smeared blood on the bed, simulating childbirth. As the play concluded, the queen's father and brother and the generals entered and embraced the baby without letting go. Although just a child picked up from the mountains, the queen treated the baby as her own and wanted him to become the heir to the throne. Soon after, under the arrangement of the prime minister, the 10 Yuan Dynasty governors gathered in the capital to congratulate. At the banquet, the 10 governors unexpectedly proposed to the prime minister about the king should recruit more concubines. The queen quickly accused the governors. Surprisingly, the prime minister supported their suggestion. Expanding the king's harem would definitely require the queen's approval. The governors proposed reinstating the queen's position. The prime minister, unsatisfied, persisted in discussing the previous rebellion. One governor argued that there was no concrete evidence implicating the queen in the rebellion. The other governors, frustrated but powerless, supported the prime minister and his faction. Seeing the governors well prepared, the queen reluctantly agreed. The queen worried that if the queen returned, her life would become difficult. The prime minister dismissed the queen's opinion, requesting each province to nominate a candidate for the imperial harem. The governors naturally nominated their daughters, all seeking ties to the royal family. The prime minister also had this plan in mind, knowing that the governors' daughters, gathering in the palace, would. The governors dispersed throughout the country, but the queen didn't want any of them to enter the harem. When candidates from the first 9 provinces arrived, she called them back, giving each a bowl of contraceptive potion to drink. The queen drank first, then forced the girls to finish their bowls. This action made the girls experience the cruelty of the harem. As they prepared to pour the potion for the 10th candidate, it was Sun Niang who arrived. After losing her child, she sought refuge in Luoyang province, cared for by General Bichen, an old friend. She asked General Bichen to push her forward to select a concubine. Her goal was to defeat the daughters of the governors and become the queen. She avenged her child by eliminating the queen and the prime minister. The other girls had never experienced Sun Niang's cruelty, so they mocked her for her lowly background. Upon the queen's arrival, the girls panicked and formed a line. When the queen saw Sun Niang, she was equally justified in not recognizing her. The queen asked Sun Niang why she was there, and Sun Niang just laughed mysteriously. The empress entered and said she was the nominee from Luoyang. Then she announced the competition with a total of 3 rounds. The first round would be the physiognomy, which would be held today. But the queen said that today's court physiognomist couldn't come. She bluntly claimed all court physiognomists were loyal to the empress. Not reassured, she instructed the painter to create a fake physiognomy and send it to the court. That way, no one would know who was more fair. But she still looked down on the empress. Even with the fake physiognomy, the empress was prepared. She gifted a special plow to the daughters of the governor she approved of. The court physiognomists recognized the plow as the empress's. When the results were announced, the queen was stunned, losing her teeth. Even Sun Niang, whom she hated the most, was chosen. The next day, the king, looking tired, sat on the throne, preparing to meet the candidates from the provinces. Suddenly the king's demeanor became excited at the end of the line where Sun Niang suddenly appeared. In that moment, the king, who had been mute for so long, unexpectedly called out Sun Niang's name. When escorting the candidates away, a court eunuch pulled Sun Niang into a small room, advising her not to risk withdrawing from the harem competition again. Sun Niang explained that she returned not for fame, but because the palace maids had suffered living in a foreign land, struggling and being treated cruelly by the natives. This time, Sun Niang entered the palace to rise to power, to safeguard the low-born girls in the palace. Sun Niang knew even the court eunuchs desired to protect their comrades. Otherwise, they wouldn't have introduced her to become the king's harem. The harem maiden's fate was oppressed by the queen. Sun Niang sought to shoulder the harem maiden's burden, to spare high-born palace girls from oppression. Sun Niang's words made the court eunuch become emotional. After meeting Sun Niang, the king's speechlessness had completely gone as he secretly met Sun Niang. The king hugged Sun Niang tightly, thinking she had returned for him, but to his surprise, Sun Niang's demeanor was cold, showing no joy at seeing him again. She bluntly announced her return to disempower the prime minister, to seek vengeance for loved ones and friends beside her, and for this, she needed the king's help, because the prime minister is the common enemy of both. The king hesitated, having previously struggled to oppose the prime minister. Only receiving more humiliation increased the king's hopelessness. For the second round, the queen decided not to give Sun Niang any chance. The queen's initial challenge was to create the palace's most precious dish. This woman opened a pot inside which was a bowl of white salt. The emperor looked extremely surprised, while the queen was full of disdain. Know that this is the selection of concubines for the emperor. The next words from Sun Niang made them all silent, as inside was something, a plate of salt. Sun Niang said that every dish on earth has salt added to it, just like people enjoy the warmth and care of the emperor. This performance astonished everyone present. But the queen scolded her, accusing her of trickery. It wasn't deception but rather deep praise. The emperor was very pleased and gave her 5 points, but unexpectedly, the queen, as the head of the competition, gave Sun Niang only 1 point. Why is that? According to reason, the queen should use moderation to persuade others. Unexpectedly aggressive, despite the dissatisfaction of the emperor and empress, they were powerless to act. The empress's father, a political mastermind who controls the emperor's military, left the emperor powerless. Lately, the queen deliberately hindered Sun Niang by barring her from the kitchen. The kitchen that could be used was gone, and she could only watch others cook. After everyone had finished, only salt remained in the kitchen, there were no more cooking ingredients, and time was running out. Finally, what to do in this urgent situation, she only presented a bowl of salt. However, she became a thorn in the queen's flesh. Sun Yang also considered it as passing the second round. In the final round, the queen asked the Royal Academy's top scholars to set the toughest topic. Fearful of the topic's difficulty, she stationed guards to watch day and night until the selection concluded. In this round, the queen wanted all the girls to return home. That way, the palace would continue to be her world. Confidently, this woman opened the exam paper to reveal a painting requiring its meaning to be explained. The girls, upon seeing it, immediately began writing. The queen's painting showed her with a sinister smile, portraying Avalokitesvara. In the middle were two women burning fire to cook rice. Below them, one person is struggling, and another gossiping, hinting at a time of peace. But Sun Niang thought it was too simple. The queen wouldn't make it that easy. With every passing minute, the other girls submitted their papers. Helpless, she thought of something where firewood should be but was absent, resorting instead to tearing down houses for firewood. Even the only valuable buffalo in the house was sold just to alleviate immediate suffering, without thinking about how to survive the following year. The painting's meaning starkly contrasted with the depicted piece. The Royal Academy announced this as the correct answer. Sun Niang successfully passed this round. The queen had no reason to prevent her from entering the palace. And thus, Sun Niang, along with 5 other girls, was appointed as 5th-ranked talents, officially entering the palace, where the real battle began. This concubine took the initiative in the first attack. Every night, the emperor chose her. In the palace, she covertly taught the emperor to read and write, skipping tradition. However, amidst this, there were spies. Could they escape the spies' watchful eyes? This emperor has over 7,000 wives, but doesn't know a single word. To remain undetected, they nightly summoned food with the aid of Thai scholars and no NE. Meanwhile, the emperor stayed up late studying and writing. The written papers had to be secretly burned. Why? Because he's an emperor, a deceitful one? The queen's influence permeates every corner of the palace. The queen's father is a powerful figure, having served 9 emperors. These emperors, for reasons unknown, all died mysteriously. To prolong his life for a few more episodes, the emperor pretended to be a lecher. This led others to believe he was solely interested in carnal pleasures. Fortunately, they succeeded in deceiving everyone. Learning that the emperor favored only one concubine each night, the queen erupted in fury. So, one early morning, she sent a palace maid to bring Sun Niang a bowl of poisoned water to wash her face. Sun Niang hesitated, sensing something amiss as she reached for the bowl. It was a mixture of various toxic substances that could burn one's face. She didn't show any emotion. Instead, she poured the water over their faces. The queen lost in the first round. Unwilling to accept, she resorted to trickery. The next morning, Sun Niang wore extravagant clothing to the audience. The queen approached, scolding her and even wanting to undress her. Only then did Sun Niang notice that the other concubines were all dressed plainly. It turned out today was the Queen Mother's Memorial Day. She informed the other concubines that the maid she sent had missed Sun Niang. The queen used this as an excuse to beat her with a whip. The queen continued to whip her, and she endured. But after 24,567,800 lashes, her back was torn, yet the queen showed no intention of stopping. When the emperor knew he wanted to intervene but was stopped by those below. It should be noted that this emperor is weak and timid. No one predicted that the emperor would once again fail to act. Sun Niang, though beaten, didn't cry out. Her breathing remained steady. She was known for her endurance. The queen grew tired, and her hand eventually stopped because of what? Normally, the Thai would carry out the punishment, but this time she acted on her own. Why? Out of jealousy and to establish authority. The queen's action, akin to killing a chicken to frighten monkeys, quickly yielded results, making the concubines in the palace dare not speak up. But Sun Niang was not easy to provoke, enduring so many lashes without making a sound because deep inside her, there was hatred. Resting for a day, she called the palace maid back and asked who ordered her not to inform. The palace maid wanted to dilute the wine, but Sun Niang whipped her. The serious teacher, the palace maid, confessed it was John. Sun Niang remained relentless in her pursuit of John, her fury unyielding. The next day, she called the emperor to admonish the concubines to identify John. The queen wanted to protect John but couldn't. John was dragged out and beaten severely, 20 times. Their endless struggle persisted. The queen impatiently saw an opportunity to execute Sun Niang. Sun Niang took action, fearing the queen's harassment. To protect the pregnant concubines, she ensured they took contraceptive pills daily. The concubines also suffered and wanted to bribe the queen to avoid taking the pills, but the queen refused. They shifted their bribery target to John, the one in charge of the pills. Who would have thought John was two-faced? Despite receiving gifts, she continued making contraceptive pills, leaving the concubines in despair. Sung Niang seized the opportunity to find a concubine named Mi-sun, saying that John was the queen's person and couldn't betray her for money. Mi-sun realized her foolishness and asked Sung Niang what to do. Unexpectedly, Sung Niang immediately silenced her, but didn't explain why. But obviously, this wasn't enough. The two fought in front of the concubines, and word reached the queen. She secretly rejoiced because now Sung Niang had committed a fault. If she refused to take the contraceptive pills, the queen would have a reason to punish Sung Niang. The next morning, the queen first inquired about yesterday's fight. Sung Niang cheerfully admitted to it, and the queen was satisfied. She had the palace maid bring the pills, expecting Sung Niang to refuse them. By that time, both charges of assaulting and disobeying orders would be counted together to completely eliminate Sung Niang, but this time, an unexpected accident occurred. The queen brought the contraceptive pills prepared in front of the concubines. The concubines, fearing the queen, quickly consumed all the pills. But right after taking them, Mi-sun suddenly clutched her throat as if poisoned and fell. The royal physician promptly examined her with a silver pen and confirmed she had been poisoned. The empress arrived not long after, asking what had happened, then looked towards the queen. The queen panicked, denying she had done it. The empress said she would investigate the matter herself. So, with the emperor and the grandees present, she requested the imperial physician to check if the pills were poisoned. Upon discovering the pills were not poisoned, the queen swiftly reverted to her arrogant demeanor. Excluded from the list of suspects, she seized the chance to apprehend the poisoner. However, at this point, it was only the beginning of Sung Niang's real plan. She told General Bichin and the strategist that this time she would use a self-inflicted plan to harm herself. Concubine John went outside Mi-sun's room to inquire about the situation, accidentally knowing that after arguing with Sung Niang, Mi-sun had eaten a piece of cake that Sung Niang had sent to apologize. The queen immediately came up with the idea that she could use this clue to frame Sung Niang for poisoning Mi-sun in a plot to kill her. The next day, Concubine John spread rumors everywhere. Immediately, the harem was full of rumors about Sung Niang plotting to kill Mi-sun. Even the king heard the news. But Sung Niang remained calm and immediately went to see the queen, presenting her entire plan. The queen, upon hearing it, even laughed heartily. Very pleased with Sung Niang's plan, she considered the queen as a thorn in her side. That morning, the queen intended to use the poisoning as a pretext to arrest Sung Niang after the concubines had taken the pills. But unexpectedly, Sung Niang also took the pills and ate the red apples inside. Then she collapsed and couldn't get up, apparently poisoned. The empress arrived not long after, saying that this was due to mutual jealousy in the harem. Poisoned, she urged the queen to escalate the investigation. The imperial physician found 2 apple seeds in Sung Niang's mouth, confirming the poison in the apples. To establish authority, the queen was very concerned about this case, first arresting the palace maid and the steward to brew strict interrogations, but got nothing. With the surveillance team, she searched the concubines' bedrooms to find who hid the poisoned apples. These concubines were all daughters of nobles. Mistreated, the nobles sought the prime minister in the capital to confer. The prime minister clearly favored the queen, using his power to suppress the nobles. He also pledged severe consequences for the culprit once found. After the search, the queen went to inspect the empress's residence. The empress agreed, and after a thorough search, the queen found nothing. The timing was right when Sung Niang, who had just recovered, said that there was one place left to check. The queen hesitated to conduct a search in her own palace. With the empress by her side, the queen insisted on a thorough investigation to silence any potential objections. Reluctantly, the queen agreed, and attendants searched her bedroom meticulously but found nothing. A servant opened a jewelry box, which hadn't been long since received. A Western merchant had secretly given it to the queen. Sung Niang, curious, intentionally asked about the item's origin. The queen, displeased, immediately wanted to reclaim the box. During the tug-of-war, the box overturned, revealing apples from the queen's jewelry box, surprising everyone. The queen, in panic, tried to defend herself. Sung Niang picked up a red apple, saying that if this wasn't a poison apple, the queen should try eating it. The queen hesitated and dared not eat. A servant beside her quickly grabbed the apple and swallowed it. He showed no signs of poisoning, just saying it was delicious. The queen smugly turned her head and began to lecture Sung Niang, but Sung Niang didn't rush because of the jewelry box and the apples. They were the ones she had a disguised person deliver to the queen. The purpose was to now find evidence to overthrow the queen. As predicted, when the queen exerted her power again, suddenly, a palace maid beside her fell unconscious and collapsed. This time the queen couldn't defend herself. Next, the empress and the emperor convened to judge the queen's crime. All the court officials also unanimously shouted to remove the cruel queen. The queen, who always boasted, was also frightened and screamed that she didn't do it, but the empress had already colluded with Sung Niang. This time, the queen had no chance to turn the situation around. Court officials' constant criticism left the queen severely disadvantaged. The queen's father suddenly led his troops into the palace. Leveraging his power, the Prime Minister initially quashed opposition from court officials. Negotiations with the Empress began despite capturing both the individual and the evidence. The Prime Minister compromised but insisted on securing the Queen's position for his daughter, necessary to self-reflect in the palace and in. Even if the Queen went out, she couldn't wield power as before. The Prime Minister hesitated but eventually agreed to this plan. After helping the Queen and Sun Niang meet again, she also realized that this was definitely Sun Niang's trap, ready to strike. But this time, Sun Niang didn't need to hold back much. The Queen was taken to the palace, and Sun Niang was appointed as a third-ranking royal concubine. She was closer to the true master position of the harem, but the danger also increased when she learned that Sun Niang had set up a trap for the Queen, making the palace no longer under her control. The Prime Minister promptly intensified pressure on the Emperor to abdicate. He even directly drafted the abdication decree and asked the Emperor to stamp it. Seeing only the Prime Minister's men around, the Emperor could only comply. When Sun Yan learned of this, she immediately went to General Bichen, asking General Bichen to arrange for the nobles to meet the Emperor. Just having 10 nobles allied against could prevent the abdication. She assisted the Emperor in analyzing that initially, 5 nobles, including the Emperor's father-in-law, were involved. Surely they wouldn't want the Emperor to abdicate. Among these 5 people, 2 of them had good relations with the other 5. The nobles could be swayed, but the crucial moment remained in the meeting with them. The Emperor had to provide convincing evidence to turn the nobles against the Prime Minister. The nobles swiftly approached the Emperor, urging him to support their bid to overthrow the Prime Minister. The nobles feared the Prime Minister's power and hesitated to agree. The Emperor told them that counterfeit money was rampant in the countries, causing deficits. The Prime Minister was behind the counterfeit money, then threw spies planted among them to exchange counterfeit money for real money, making money and then playing games with them. The Emperor pledged to arrest and hand over all spies to the nobles on the day of his abdication. Hearing this, the nobles decided to support the Emperor. Days later, the Prime Minister prepared to announce the Emperor's abdication with the decree in hand. The Emperor asked to see the Prime Minister's decree, pretending to not know how to read. When the Emperor read it aloud, everyone was astonished. After finishing reading, the Emperor said that this was not intention to revoke the abdication decree. The Prime Minister aimed to compel the court to seek votes from the nobles. The hesitant Empress invited foreign spies into the palace, unsure of her next move. The nobles finally saw through the Prime Minister's deception. They backed the Emperor, resulting in the abdication decree being revoked. The power struggle between the Emperor and the Prime Minister intensified. Knowing that Sun Niang was still alive, his close associates immediately informed Wang Yiwu. The old man said that Sun Niang was saved by General Bichen, so just wait for General Bichen to return to Liaoyang province to meet her. Overjoyed to tears, Wang Yiwu eagerly anticipated their reunion. A few days later, the strategist returned to Liaoyang and met Wang Yiwu. The strategist told Wang Yiwu that Sun Niang had entered the palace as a royal concubine. Wang Yiwu was furious, thinking that Sun Niang was coerced into the palace. The strategist insisted Sun Niang entered the palace voluntarily. To avenge the Prime Minister's family, the strategist declared, currently Sun Niang carries an important mission on her shoulders, not only for herself but also carrying the hopes of General Bichen and the strategist, begging Wang Yiwu not to involve her anymore. However, Wang Yiwu couldn't accept this reality. He couldn't understand why Sun Niang made such a decision. When Wang Yiwu and his group returned to the palace, Sun Niang didn't want to meet him alone. Wang could only follow the court etiquette to request an audience with the Emperor. Finally, Sun Niang agreed to meet Wang Yiwu alongside the Emperor, only requesting the Emperor to temporarily leave, so she and Wang Yiwu could talk privately. Sun Niang's behavior was straightforward yet distant, constantly reminding Wang Yiwu that she was now the Emperor's concubine. And Wang Yiwu also understood the significance behind this. After a short conversation, they quickly parted ways. Before leaving, Wang Yiwu told Sun Niang that from now on he would also give up on her, and they would continue on their paths without tears or regrets. After the decision, both Sun Niang and Wang Yiwu cried. From then on, they became strangers going their separate ways. A year passed under the continuous influence of the factions. The Empress was released from house arrest. At the Empress's order, palace servants turned away, then promptly reversed course at her next command. This action was just to let the Empress know who was in charge in the palace now. The Empress was furious that a mere concubine from slavery dared to challenge her authority. Laughing loudly, she exited the hall, her attendants mistaking her for furious madness. Did she skip her morning medicine? The Empress said just let her dance, there are only 2 days left. The Empress's father-in-law is planning to assassinate the Emperor. After success, he'll crown the prince. A few days later, the royal hunting competition began. The nobles all joined in on the day the strategist faction plotted to assassinate the Emperor. The Emperor wanted to show his bravery. Together with his consort Sun Niang, he ventured into the forest. The two even competed to see who could hunt more, so they split up to act separately. Sun Niang dismounts under the tree canopy, while the Empress leads a group of people hiding nearby. The trap they set encounters an unforeseen problem in killing Sun Niang. The Empress can only send her men to attack. Sun Niang, trained in martial arts since childhood, fights off all pursuers while on the move. The Empress, wielding her bell, enters the fray thinking she will surely win, but to her surprise, under Sung Nying's taunts, the Empress shoots and misses back. Sung Nying holds a knife to the Empress's throat, forcing her against a tree. The Empress begins to beg Sung Nying to spare the concubines and court ladies whom she had harmed. She stabbed the tree, aiming for the Empress to witness her father and brother's heads impaled, one by one. Only then does the Empress face her punishment. On her way back, Sung Nying receives news from the Emperor, but at that moment, a large net descends from above, capturing her. Then a series of dark arrows shoot towards her. The Emperor shields Sung Nying from one arrow with his body. Rebel reinforcements arrive, overpowering and restricting the Emperor's guards. The pursuers chase the Emperor, but Wang, the loyal vassal of Kaoli, with his own courtiers blocking the pursuers. Despite not wanting to leave Sung Nying, only with the help of the relief forces do they barely escape danger. Hunting persists until evening due to poison arrows, leaving the Emperor nearly spent. Escape falters, and eventually, the Emperor is cornered by the Prime Minister's men. Believing victory is assured, the Prime Minister moves to take the Emperor away. General Bitchin leads troops to confront the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister's faction can only agree to let General Bitchin take the Emperor away. The Prime Minister immediately starts arranging the next steps. He orders Byung-Su, the mastermind behind the ambush, to handle the army involved. In court, the Empress grills the Prime Minister about the plot against the Emperor. The Prime Minister denies any involvement outright. He found the wounded Emperor and rushed to aid him, genuinely distressed. Then he elevates Byung-Su again. This person says the purpose was only to kill Sung Nying. It accidentally injured the Emperor. The Empress asks why they wanted to kill Sung Nying. Byung-Su says that many years ago, he himself brought Sung Nying into the palace as a slave girl, and she still harbors a grudge, fearing her revenge, so wanted her dead. Sung Nying accuses him of lying. At this point, the son of the Prime Minister says that King Wang Yu of Kaoli can testify, because he had a deep relationship with Sung Nying. Everyone looks towards Wang Yu, and he confirms what Byung-Su said is true. Byung-Su is taken by the Prime Minister's faction as having sacrificed his peace to save his life. Sung Nying looks at Wang Yu with indignation. She doesn't understand why her former lover betrayed her. Only Wang Yu knows that the Prime Minister had prepared two plans. If Byung-Su didn't win, there would be an attack on the palace. Both sides would lose, and Sung Nying's survival would be at risk. He prioritizes Sung Nying's safety above all else. Out of gratitude for the Emperor saving his life, Sung Nying takes care of the Emperor tirelessly day and night. As the Emperor recuperates, Sung Nying, unrelated, pledges to fulfill his wish. Today's decision will satisfy the Emperor's desire. This lady makes the Emperor call her name every day. But she has never allowed the Emperor to get close, pretending to be caught for a whole year. Finally, she decides to bathe and groom herself. With a touch of red lipstick and clad in scarlet, she glides toward the dragon bed. The Emperor, eagerly awaiting, looks on with wide eyes. Shortly after, the Empress learns of this and is furious. She blocks Sung Nying's path, pushing her down the stairs. Sung Nying faints on the spot and is taken to her room by the servants. Calling the royal physician, upon checking her pulse, he excitedly announces good news. The Emperor can't believe it happened so fast. The Empress is still reveling in the excitement of pushing someone. Court Lady Jaeon rushes in to announce she's pregnant, which turns her joy into sorrow. The Empress, infuriated, can't find words to express her pain. Upon the Empress's return, the Emperor promptly seeks her out, reminding the Empress not to repeat the plot against Lady Park, not to harm Sung Nying. The Empress also makes a demand of the Emperor. She insists on making Kim Jun crown prince in exchange for forgiving Sung Nying. The Emperor simply leaves, fueling the Empress's anger even more. At this point, the inner court informs the Empress of a lethal magic that leaves no trace. The Empress is instantly intrigued again. They seek out a sorcerer who tells the Empress this magic will cause the victim to have nightmares every night until they're exhausted and die. But if the victim has a strong destiny, not only will the magic fail, it may also transfer to the loved ones of the victim. The Empress, consumed by anger, disregards these consequences, demanding the sorcerer to proceed with the curse. Under the sorcerer's guidance, the inner court collects Sung Nying's belongings. They purchase fresh dog blood and carve Sung Nying's name on a wooden board outside her bedroom. That's the death warrant and spell. The sorcerer gives the Empress 30 talisman leaves, advising her to burn one nightly. Sung Nying will suffer from nightmares and be unable to eat or sleep. With everything prepared, the sorcerer begins the ceremony. Only a dark smoke rises from the incense burner. Finally, it transforms into the shape of a hunting dog and enters Sung Nying's dream. Sung Nying startles awake from a dream where a hunting dog rushes at her, but she discovers on her hand an actual bite mark from the hunting dog. For several continuous days, Sung Nying begins to visibly pale and lose weight drastically. She seeks out Jean, a trusted advisor with extensive knowledge and experience. Upon hearing her story, Jean immediately asks if she has a bite wound. Sung Nying is astonished to reveal the wound. Jean tells her it's a neck closing technique that cannot be broken, only endured. Sung Niang immediately thinks of the Empress. Sung Niang faces the nightmare once more. This time, she doesn't flee but confronts the hunting dog, overcoming it. The next day, Sung Niang meets Jean again and shows him the wound from the dog bite the previous night. Jean suggests checking the name plaque outside. According to rumors, this magic will erect a plaque with the victim's name surrounded by others. Sung Niang, determined, starts looking for the name plaque in the courtyard. After digging all night, they finally find it, and General Jean also finds the sorcerer performing the magic. Holding the name plaque, she seeks out the sorcerer to point out the Empress. The sorcerer adamantly stays silent. Sung Niang can only secretly send someone to spy on the Empress. They find the shrine where the Empress conducts her nightly rituals. So, she leads the Emperor to the shrine and catches the Empress in the act. The Empress justifies that she's here to pray for her son Kim Jun. The Emperor orders the inner court ladies to be interrogated, but they're all loyal to the Empress and refuse to confess. The Empress immediately calls her brother Kim Hyun to report. Kim Hyun brings strong men to release the court ladies. The bold actions of the Empress and the Prime Minister become intolerable for the Emperor. He asks General Bitchin how much chance there is to win if a coalition of 10 dukes opposes the Prime Minister. General Bitchin bluntly says less than. The scattered dukes' armies are unable to regroup before succumbing to defeat by the Prime Minister. The Emperor is determined to overthrow the Prime Minister, and now is when the Prime Minister is weakest. Sung Niang's curse afflicts the Prime Minister, driving him nightly into doubt and madness. Now he is haunted by nightmares every night and becomes paranoid and delusional. This is the prime moment to oust the Prime Minister. A few days later, General Jean reports that he has devised a plan. That day, both the Prime Minister and the Emperor attend. The Prime Minister faces allegations of tyranny and political deceit, even proposing to send troops to punish the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is furious and immediately summons the evening court, forcing the Emperor to issue a trial against the petitioner, General Bekgon. Luke ne kak von tuok dui chiu dot nin don lot jean duok ra tran. Seeing situation leaning in his favor, the Prime Minister urges the Emperor to issue the execution. The Emperor hesitates for a moment but agrees. The Prime Minister arranges for his son Kim Hyun to lead his army. Then the dukes and provincial lords gather their forces, finally assembling at Ryuyang. Kim Hyun arrives at the rendezvous point and waits for several days. He realizes something may be wrong, so he decides to lead the attack himself, on the base of General Bekgon in Ryuyang, but finds no soldiers. It turns out the dukes and General Bekgon have already sworn allegiance to the Emperor. General Bekgon submits a petition to strip Prime Minister Tran. This leads the Prime Ministers to leave the city. The dukes can easily mobilize their armies without suspicion from the Prime Minister. The two sides join forces to attack Gyeongdang. Gyeongdang is only defended by General Bekgon's troops, who begin their assault, but the defenders put up a tough fight and manage to repel General Bekgon's attack. King Wangyu of Chaoli unexpectedly leads his people in the fight against the defenders. The defenders, caught between two fronts, quickly falter. General Bekgon charges into the city as the Prime Minister receives news. He orders his men to kill the Emperor and the Queen in the palace. Then he prepares to flee the city to unite with Kim Hyun's army. In the future, he can blame General Bekgon for killing the Emperor. And the Emperor, his courtiers, and servants have all prepared to hide in a Ding palace. The rebels take some time before launching their attack. After a battle where the Emperor is besieged by the rebels, at the last minute, General Bekgon's troops arrive. The Emperor demands surrender from the rebels. Master Tan has the rebels each drop their weapons in turn. Only the son of the Prime Minister continues to resist. In a clash, General Bekgon swiftly ends the Prime Minister's son's life with one stroke of his sword. The Prime Minister walks around the city once and realizes all the city gates. The Prime Minister says, "I'm weary. Let's return home." The Empress still doesn't know the situation outside and is considering personally torturing Sung Niang to death. Sung Niang arrives before the Empress, astonishing yet still arrogant. Sung Niang orders the Empress to kneel before the Queen Mother. The Empress doesn't diminish her pride. Confronting the Queen Mother fearlessly, the Queen Mother slaps the Empress across the face. The Empress rises from the ground, turns to Sung Niang, and says, "As long as I live, the battle is not over." Sung Niang, unafraid, threatens to kill the Empress. Seeing Sung Niang's true cruelty, the Queen Mother realizes that this ally will eventually become an enemy. The next day, Kim Hyun leads his troops back to the capital. Despite numerical superiority, without internal cohesion, they are quickly defeated and flee elsewhere. The trial of the former Prime Minister also begins quickly. The former Prime Minister points at Sung Niang and says to everyone, "The great cause will be destroyed by this woman. Just wait and see. His Majesty will once again become a puppet." These words only increase the Queen Mother's suspicion of Sung Niang. General Bitchin executes the former Prime Minister in the Grand Hall. Such a high-ranking official falls, but the royal family's battle is not over. Sung Niang's ambitions are truly growing. The next step, kill the Empress with no consequences. The Emperor prepares poisoned dishes, one by one. The Empress is not to be trifled with. The second dish goes flying, the third one pushed away, playing the game until 81 different dishes. The courtiers beside her all mock the Emperor as he brings out yet another dish. The Empress throws it straight at the Emperor, seeing him unable to do anything. the most resolute court lady, Sun Niang, appears. She's the one to overthrow the Empress. The Emperor drags the Empress out onto the street to ridicule her. The Empress pleads with Sun Niang, hoping to see her son Kim Jun before she dies. Sun Niang gently tells the Empress that Kim Jun is her imposter. It turns out Sun Niang had discovered the Empress's fake pregnancy early on. With the sole witness to the false birth murdered by the Empress's faction, Sun Niang is on the verge of becoming the palace's mistress. She vows to expose Kim Jun's true identity to the public before her demise. Empress's family to face extinction in the face of someone even more ruthless. The Empress collapses on the ground. She is taken to the execution site. Sun Niang personally oversees the beheading. Faced with a crowd like a river, the Empress is truly terrified. It's too late for everything. She is forcibly tied with a rope. At this moment, Sun Niang feels like she has finally vanquished a great adversary. She quietly recites the names of her fellow villagers and her son in her heart. But she doesn't know that the fake son of the Empress she's about to face, Kim Jun, is actually her own son. A thud echoes as the Empress is executed. Sun Niang wipes away tears from the corner of her eyes. She vows to seize the position of Empress, controlling the Emperor, so that her unborn child will become the Emperor. Not long after, Sun Niang's unborn child becomes a prince named Ki Zhang. Upon hearing this, the Queen Mother cannot sit still. She knows of Sun Niang's cruelty, and now she has a son. The future of the entire nation will be controlled by her, so the Queen Mother brings the Empress's son, Kim Jun, back to her palace to raise him. She wants to use Kim Jun to oppose Ki Zhang. Sun Niang still hasn't realized that the Queen Mother will quickly turn from ally to enemy. She continues to participate in every decision of the Emperor regarding the court without hesitation. The courtiers also realize that the Emperor listens to Sun Niang's words, just as they have overthrown the Prime Minister. 9 dukes come to see Sun Niang. They hope to nominate the Duke of Van Nam Province. Because Mr. Park is the most experienced among the provincial dukes, but the one with the greatest merit in overthrowing the Prime Minister is General Becken. Sun Niang knows that refusing Mr. Park will cause the Emperor to lose the support of the provincial dukes. Rejecting General Becken emotionally and logically is even more unacceptable. It could make the officials resentful. At this point, the Emperor is also troubled by the rewards. Sun Niang immediately enters and offers to help the Emperor. She thinks this Emperor is really foolish. It took him 2 days to draft a decree that beloved courtiers looked through and immediately frowned upon. She then tells the Emperor that this decree, when announced, will cause the officials to revolt. She adds a few words with the pen to the decree, which surprises the Emperor to see. Then he bestows the position of Empress upon the beloved court lady. The court lady also thinks she's about to succeed, but at this moment, she is equally surprised to see the decree that the Emperor has drafted, just as she wants to praise the Emperor's intelligence, saying it's the merit of Sun Niang's court lady. The Queen Mother's expression changes. Having just overthrown an arrogant empress, to let a court lady intervene in politics arises. The Queen Mother unexpectedly laughs loudly. Several days later, during the award ceremony, the decree reveals its true nature. First, General Becken is announced as the Prime Minister. General Becken thanks the Emperor. Next, Mr. Park is announced as the highest-ranking Chancellor. Everyone is surprised. Sun Niang nods lightly to Mr. Park. Mr. Park is pleased to step forward to take his position. The Prime Minister is the highest position after the Emperor. And now there's a Chancellor sharing power. He asks the Emperor why the position of Chancellor, which was abolished by the previous Emperor. The Emperor only says a few empty words. After leaving, Sun Niang seeks out the grandson of Prime Minister Becken, General Jean. She knows Prime Minister Becken's stern character, and explaining won't be useful, but General Jean is intelligent and understands that the position of Chancellor that she has given to Mr. Park is just nominal. She asks General Jean to reduce Prime Minister Becken's dissatisfaction. The surprising thing is that almost at the same time, the Queen Mother secretly meets with Prime Minister Becken. This makes Prime Minister Becken even more dissatisfied with Sun Niang. When General Jean returns, Prime Minister Becken even denies him the opportunity to mediate, but directly requests him to arrange for his granddaughter to start learning. He wants to seize the position of Empress from Sun Niang. General Jean wants to advise, but Prime Minister Becken is furious. It seems like the war between him and Sun Niang has begun. A few days later, during an evening court session, some provincial dukes are appointed, expressing their support. Prime Minister Becken stands aside without speaking. As the Emperor prepares to bestow an edict, an old official steps forward, the Queen Mother. The Queen Mother wears simple robes outside. She requests the Emperor not to appoint Sun Niang as Empress. The Queen Mother says it's because Sun Niang is of lowly birth, which would damage the reputation of the royal family. The Emperor has no choice but to postpone. In this scene, Sun Niang stands aside, observing. The Emperor has no choice but to postpone. In this scene, Sun Niang stands aside, observing. It seems like the enemy has revealed themselves. She knows the Emperor can't do this for her. She must fight her own battle. As predicted, not long after, Prime Minister Beckon and General Jean enter, submitting a joint petition to the Emperor against appointing Sun Niang as Empress. The Emperor opens the petition, the first person to object. The Emperor opens the petition, the first person to object is Prime Minister Beckon. The first person she needs to defeat is the granddaughter of Prime Minister, who will become the next Empress, the cruelest woman in the country. Both want to become Empress, but they didn't expect the most beautiful woman to strike first. She had someone poison Sun Mion's daughter. Luckily, the spoon turned black when she took it out, indicating poison. Sun Niang, who had just overthrown the Empress, only thinking of the two former close aides of the previous Empress, regarding Jian, the most beautiful woman in her current palace. Therefore, Sun Niang took strong measures against these two aides. First, she poured salt water on them and then used a cane to beat them. The salt water soaked into the bleeding wounds. The two were beaten to near unconsciousness. The Queen Mother suddenly intervened and requested their release. Just as Sun Niang was about to explain, the Queen Mother said, "The new Empress is coming, don't cause any more trouble." Sun Niang understood that she had been eliminated. The Queen Mother brought those two aides back to her palace, and decided to promote them to be the stewards of the Empress. The Queen Mother also made that they must serve her, unaware that the new Empress was only beautiful in appearance but more poisonous than anyone else. The imperial court solemnly held the ceremony too. The Emperor, filled with regret towards Sun Niang. The Emperor was drunk, but the new Empress truly showed her courage. She pretended to be gentle. The next morning when the Emperor woke up, the Empress said she had sat all night and her legs were numb. The Emperor believed this drama, thinking the Empress was truly sincere, but she still couldn't replace Sun Niang in the Emperor's heart. Except for breakfast, the Emperor hurriedly went to find Sun Niang. Sun Niang did not welcome the Emperor warmly but went to find General Jean. Still about her son being poisoned, General Jean, intelligent and subtle, handled everything skillfully. After Sun Niang left, General Jean immediately went to see the Empress. As the Empress's cousin, he understood the Empress's cruelty well, not wanting to participate in such deeds anymore. The Empress finally removed her mask and said she had done it, but General Jean wasn't worried about Sun Niang. He was only afraid that the Empress's carelessness would lead the entire family into an irredeemable situation. But sitting in the position of Empress, she was calculating how to attack Sun Niang. But Sun Niang, at this moment, didn't care about the battle. She was studying the ledgers left by the former Prime Minister. The former Prime Minister, in office for over 30 years, had hidden a large amount of gold. Sun Niang hoped to find clues in these ledgers to secure gold as a foundation for her son to ascend to the throne. When she didn't know what to do, her former lover, Wang Yu, brought news. Near the gold mine once controlled by the former Prime Minister, Sun Niang requested to record the lyrics of this nursery rhyme. She pondered and finally came up with an answer. The Empress suddenly opened the morning court. At the court, the Empress didn't care about Sun Niang's rejection. She actively wanted to grant Sun Niang the authority to manage people and money in the palace. She withdrew to prepare for an attack. But when she left the court, the Empress appeared pitiful. The palace attendants asked why, and the Empress said she didn't see threatening glances from the palace maids. The Empress pretended to be frightened because the new queen had just arrived. Right after the queen left, the two aides believed her words. They quickly reported to the Queen Mother. Seeing one of the aides reporting to the Empress, she knew these two were her eyes and ears, placed beside her by the Queen Mother. She wanted to sow discord between the palace maids. Indeed, the Queen Mother didn't hesitate and went to the palace maids. Then she regained the power that the queen had just given to the palace maids and handed it back to the queen. The palace maids were not easy to provoke. The palace maids suggested bringing the queen alone. Then the two left hand in hand, leaving the queen so angry that her face turned pale. This incident quickly reached the Queen Mother's ears. The Queen Mother came to support the queen trying to monopolize the Emperor's affection. The palace maids because they knew someone would soon faint. An official lifted the sleeve of a court lady and discovered that this strange illness originated from the palace maids ordering people to poison the food of the court ladies. Soon, many court ladies in the palace fell ill. The imperial physician advised the royal family to avoid danger for a while, but the palace maids argued that the sick prince couldn't travel far and should. The only place in the capital so many people was the Prime Minister's mansion. The entire royal family moved to the Prime Minister's mansion. At night, Sun Niang asked her former lover, Wang Yu, to arrange a gambling game. She lost early and left, ordering food and wine to be sent to several families of the Prime Minister's mansion. Soon, these families became uneasy. She led a group of trusted people into the Prime Minister's study. She arranged for a merchant to deliver goods to the palace and pulled a horse-drawn, relying on the treasure location she had decoded earlier. She found where the former Prime Minister had quietly hidden treasures. A few days later, she prepared to move the gold into her bedroom. Just as the Emperor came out, the palace maids explained that it was goods The emperor, most curious, insisted on opening a large box full of gold. The queen mother also arrived. The emperor hastily closed the box and ordered it to be brought inside. He wanted to protect the palace maids. The palace maids realized they couldn't escape and opened all the boxes, stunning everyone. The palace maids said this batch of gold was from a duke in the harem. The queen mother didn't believe it. The palace maids didn't wait for the emperor's orders. The remaining boxes all contained everyday fabrics and jewelry. It turned out the palace maids had anticipated this mishap. Only one box of gold could be transported into the palace each time. With this money, the palace maids immediately began to bribe the courtiers. The prime minister was preparing to conquer the west. Orders were given for each province to provide money, due to the previous turmoil. The palace maids seized the opportunity to sponsor. Quickly, she drew the provincial nobles to her side. The forces in the court were gradually arranged. The queen was preparing to launch a major attack to overthrow. A crying boy discovered bruises on his body as he lifted his clothes. The enraged queen asked her servants who dared to harm the prince. The servants didn't know what to do until they remembered a palace maid who had previously carried the prince. The queen immediately stood up and walked towards the maid's chamber. Arriving there, she didn't say a word and just slapped the maid, scolded the queen for acting excessively without evidence and hitting someone. But the queen insisted that the palace maid was the culprit. As the two argued fruitlessly, the palace maid finally spoke up. She requested to bring the elder prince to the court. She not only wanted to prove her innocence but also to find the culprit. All those who had contact with the prince stood on either side. The palace maid requested everyone present to hold the prince in their arms. Although the prince couldn't speak, he would surely be afraid of whoever had harmed him. Indeed, when Court Lady John held the prince, he became scared and cried loudly. The palace maid ordered Court Lady John to be detained for interrogation. Court Lady John, panicked, denied any involvement. The queen requested to release Court Lady John, but at this moment, she demanded Court Lady John to be taken away. As Court Lady John left the room, she helplessly glanced at the queen. It turned out that the queen herself was the mastermind behind it all. The palace maid immediately informed the queen mother that they would find the mastermind. In the prison cell, Court Lady John was tortured until she begged for mercy. The palace maid ordered everyone to leave and told Court Lady John that she could be spared. She had to reveal the true identity of the elder prince when the time came to crown him, so when the time comes to make the prince her crown prince. Court Lady John had no choice but to agree. At this point, the queen, anxious, approached her and asked if anyone had confessed yet. The palace maid said someone had confessed. She wanted to negotiate with the palace maid. Court Lady John was astonished. While the queen foolishly believed that Court Lady John had protected her, she asked the palace maid if she had reported to the emperor. The palace maid said no because the impact would be too great. This was exactly what the queen had hoped for. The palace maid suggested that those loyal to the queen should handle it. The queen was delighted and promised to assist the palace maid in the future if needed. At this point, Court Lady John dared not say a word. The queen seemed to comply with her every wish. 5 years passed, and both princes had grown up. The queen always told the elder prince that the palace maid was the enemy who killed his mother. The elder prince hated the palace maid to the core, and the bow between the queen. She could take advantage of the situation. The palace maid approached the queen, requesting her to fulfill her previous promise. She asked the queen to suggest to the queen mother to crown the prince soon, thinking it was time. Seeing the palace maid growing stronger by the day, both in the harem and at court, the queen couldn't wait any longer. She contacted the prime minister to write a letter to the emperor. The emperor immediately agreed to crown the son. The queen and the prime minister disagreed with this proposal and suggested holding. The emperor always forbade the prince from studying and training martial arts. He believed that even if there were a competition, the second prince would win, and he agreed to the proposal. The palace maid approached Court Lady John and demanded that she reveal the true identity of the elder prince on the day of the prince's coronation. But the palace maid promised that after everything was over, living a normal life while carrying hopes for a new life. Court Lady John agreed, but on her way back, she was intercepted by the queen. The queen didn't say much directly. Seeing John's silence, the queen wanted to play a game with her. She asked John to stand on a stack of books and then wrapped a white rope around her neck. Next, the queen requested someone to take away a book. John remained steady, so the queen demanded another book to be taken away. John started to plead for mercy, but the queen ignored her. The queen waited for this and requested John to be taken away. John told the queen that the elder prince wasn't her biological son. This meant that the elder prince couldn't become the heir. John said that the eldest prince was not the biological son of the previous queen. That she picked up caused a stir. The eldest prince cannot become crown prince. But the queen didn't want the prince born of the palace maid to become the heir either, so she devised a plan against the palace maid, instructing John to write a letter, accusing the palace maid of forcing her to frame the elder prince. John, a white rope was wrapped around her neck. Just as John was riding, a white rope was wrapped around her neck, and she was pulled out of the game on the floor. The next day, John's body was found hanging alongside a suicide note. Everyone believed that the palace maid had forced John to do this to make the second prince the heir. But this only tarnished the reputation of the palace maid and wasn't enough to overturn her position. The queen began her next move, arranging for John to secretly meet with Byung-soo, even though it was a serious crime that could lead to the destruction of the Chuji family. Byung-soo was still afraid. At this point, the queen presented her ring as evidence, promising to protect him at all times. However, their meeting was witnessed by someone familiar with the palace maid, who then reported it to her. The palace maid, without much thought, realized that if the elder prince was harmed, everyone would blame her. So she hurried to the temple where the elder prince was praying. The elder prince's guards were almost all killed, but when the palace maid saw that Byung-soo didn't dare to approach because the queen had always told him, "The palace maid is the enemy who killed my mother," she lied, saying she was the prince's uncle sent to protect him. The prince believed her and slowly walked towards Byung-soo. At that moment, one of the prince's close aides approached and told him that Byung-soo was an assassin. The prince immediately ran to the palace maid. Byung-soo shot an arrow, and the prince fell into the arms of the palace maid. Byung-soo took advantage of the opportunity to escape. When the arrow was removed, the palace maid accidentally noticed 3 birthmarks on the prince's foot. These were the marks of the son she had born to King Chao many years ago. The palace maid burst into tears, apologizing to the comatose prince. The comatose prince was brought into the palace. The queen immediately accused the palace maid, along with the fact that last night she decided it was the palace maid's doing. But the emperor, on the other hand, saying they needed to find the culprit. The queen pretended to care about the palace maid. The palace maid showed no emotion but thanked the queen. This time, she was determined to overthrow the queen, having evidence of the assassination attempt from the previous night, with Byung-soo dropping his ring at the scene. Palace maid. The palace maid went to see the emperor, who was worried about how to quell the criticism of the courtiers towards the palace maid. The palace maid said she would find the culprit, but with one condition: she would handle the culprit. The emperor asked what if not found, then the concubine said to consider her the culprit. The emperor immediately summoned a court meeting. When the concubine entered the court, she immediately suggested punishing her, while the queen just sat quietly watching the battle. The concubine had no time to argue with the queen. The concubine held a small ring. Everyone present was surprised. The emperor requested to bring the ring closer for him to see. It's not the queen's, so why is she panicking and not knowing what to do? The concubine immediately said that the queen herself had hired the assassin of the prince. The queen denied, saying her ring was stolen by someone else. Then she went on to say that surely the concubine had stolen and accused her. The concubine said that this ring was found by the guards at the assassination scene. The guard answered that he witnessed it. The ring fell from the assassin during the battle. All the courtiers were astonished. The emperor asked who the assassin was. The guard said it was Byung-soo, who had participated in the rebellion plot. The queen still tried to defend herself, saying they had conspired to deceive. She didn't know who Byung-soo was. Meanwhile, the queen also received help from the empress, but the concubine had meticulously prepared for this day. And there is another witness, the upper palace, who once took care of the prince and is now serving the queen. Out of affection for the prince, she admitted that the queen had met Byung-soo, but she didn't know about their plot to kill the prince. The queen couldn't defend herself anymore. The emperor ordered her to be, but the matter was not over yet. The concubine reported to the emperor that the prince was not the queen's biological son before the court of Bangyanai. Then, the concubine called a monk. The monk recounted that the prince was actually a child they found at the temple. But then the queen had him poisoned and burned the temple the night before to cover up. But luckily, this monk went down the mountain and avoided a disaster. Hearing this, the empress collapsed on the throne because the prince was the one she had raised to confront the concubine after the main noon, declaring the removal of her position, sending her to the border, prohibiting communication with anyone except the queen's adoptive. She could only watch without being able to save herself. Next, the prince was also expelled from the palace. The concubine arranged for servants to take care of the prince after recovery to send him back to Chao Lai. This scene was accidentally witnessed by a guard of King Chao Lai. When he returned and told the story to others, King Wang Yu heard and was surprised to know that Kim Jun was his son. King Wang Yu began to interact with Kim Jun and increasingly felt that he was his son. He told his subordinates that he would inform Kim Jun of their father-son relationship. This conversation was overheard by a matchmaker. She couldn't believe Kim Jun was the son of the concubine and King Wang Yu and immediately passed this information to the older brother Hyun. On the day Wang Yu prepared to take the prince away, the prince's health deteriorated and he died. Wang Yu hugged the prince in pain. The news also reached the concubine's hands, and she was endlessly in pain. But now she could only restrain herself because her second son was about to be appointed as the crown prince. After the final brutal struggles, she finally welcomed this day. After the cheers of the courtiers, the concubine looked towards the empress, and the empress looked very fierce. A new struggle began. After the afternoon court, the empress immediately summoned the prime minister. The concubine also gathered loyal ministers around her. She told the courtiers that she was still not satisfied. When both sides were ready to attack each other, the emperor was haunted by nightmares every night. In a nightmare, the emperor harmed the concubine he loved the most, questioning why she plotted against him. The concubine hastily explained that it was just the emperor's nightmare, not the truth. Finally, the emperor woke up and let go. To alleviate his daily headaches, the emperor only knew how to drink and frolic. He entrusted all the power of the court to the prime minister. Upon receiving power, the prime minister's first act was to purge the close aides of the empress in the court. The prime minister's advisor advised that although these courtiers belonged to the empress, they were also talented individuals helping to maintain. However, the prime minister decided to start by arresting a group of. The empress went to the prison to request their release. The prime minister told the empress that this was just the beginning and would eventually expose everything from its roots. The focus was squarely on the empress, who showed no signs of weakness, saying, "We'll see who laughs last." The empress went to see the emperor. The emperor requested that the empress educate, without interfering in politics. With no other option, the empress took the emperor out of the palace, so he could see the hardships of the people under the prime minister's rule. But the emperor showed no interest and immediately returned to the palace. At this moment, he saw a familiar face in the crowd. The former lover of the empress, Wang Yu. The emperor was so angry that he fell off his horse upon being brought back to the palace. After being examined by the imperial physician, it was reported that there was no immediate danger to his life, but it was uncertain when he would wake up. The prime minister also hurried to the scene. The empress called the prime minister to her chamber. She told the prime minister that now that the emperor was in a coma, no one could protect the empress, so they should take the opportunity to eliminate the empress. The prime minister hesitated happen if the emperor woke up and investigated this. The empress suggested framing her for treason before reporting. While the two were discussing, an aide came to report that the empress had summoned the courtiers to the grand hall. The empress and the prime minister were astonished, never expecting the empress to act so quickly. It turned out that as soon as the prime minister stepped into the empress's palace, the empress immediately decided to summon the empress. But the empress and the crown prince were already seated. The empress asked the empress why she was sitting on the dragon throne. Representing his father, handling state affairs was not appropriate. A courtier beside him said that the crown prince, being the empress's son. The prime minister was dissatisfied with turning his back. The ministers responded firmly to the prime minister's growling. The empress also shouted at the empress not to let her sit on the dragon throne. The empress was also impolite, telling the empress that if she continued to oppose her regency, she would be charged with disobeying the emperor's orders. The empress had no more words to say, but the empress was relentless. She accused the empress of mismanaging the palace. The palace management to the trusted courtiers of the empress. The two accepted the order and thanked the empress. The empress restricted the empress from leaving her chamber. Next, the prime minister demanded the seal that the emperor had previously given him. Now the power of the prime minister. Underestimated that the prime minister still controls a large number. The prime minister's grandson came to the empress, and she was told to go to the library to find a book. When the empress arrived at the library and flipped through the bookshelves about the corruption and lawlessness surrounding the prime minister, it turns out that General Jean was also very dissatisfied. So, the empress arranged a banquet to test all the officials listed in the book, and provided each with a cup containing poison. She told them that if they drank this cup, they would prove their innocence. It also indicated that if they were wrong, she would voluntarily give up her position. The officials looked at each other. At this point, the empress took out a ledger and said that they all had their names in the list of corrupt and bribed officials, but no official dared to drink. Only the prime minister took the cup and drank it all because he alone was innocent. There was no poison in the cup. The empress just wanted to force the officials to confess. The soldiers were ready outside to rush into the hall and arrest the corrupt officials. The empress went to the palace and found the emperor had awakened from his coma. She immediately ordered a cup of medicine. The emperor thought it was a cure and drank it all. After drinking, he once again fell into a state of unconsciousness and quickly fell asleep. The imperial supervisor questioned the empress about what she had done to the emperor, but the empress didn't care about him. The emperor was transferred safely to the empress's palace. The empress could be said to hold supreme power to avenge her eldest son. The first order she issued was to demand the execution of the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager remained proud and strong. Her mouth was stuffed and the bottle of poison was poured into the Empress Dowager's mouth. When he saw his granddaughter harmed, he came to the palace to find the emperor but was stopped by the stout man outside. The empress stepped out and told him that everything with the emperor was fine and asked him to go back. The prime minister couldn't be easily persuaded. He prepared to rush in. The palace guards stepped forward to stop the prime minister. Then he asked General Jean to arrest the imperial physician who was treating the emperor. A group of people gathered at the Queen Mother's palace to ask the imperial physician said that he also did not see the emperor every day as requested, but all the medicine made the emperor's condition worse. Hearing this, thinking that the empress was plotting to harm the emperor to seize power, the messengers of the Great Lord came to report that the empress was summoning military commanders. The Queen Mother more convinced that the empress was preparing to usurp power. They couldn't afford to miss the opportunity to take the initiative as they did before. They would lead people to storm into the empress's bedroom. As everything was just arranged, General Jean came to see the empress. General Jean realized that the empress was trying to incite the prime minister to rebellion. General Jean did not inform the prime minister of the truth. He was tired of the prime minister's blind loyalty and belligerent nature. These directly led to the suffering of the people. The emperor had awakened and wanted to return to his palace. The empress told the emperor that tonight the prime minister would come to kill her. The emperor didn't completely believe that the prime minister would do such. But under the continuous request of the empress, he stayed. The imperial physician opened the door for the prime minister's people. The prime minister led his people into the empress's palace. The empress cursed the prime minister for his rebellious plot. The prime minister held his sword ready to kill the empress. He asked the prime minister why he did such a thing, still holding the sword wanting to kill the empress. But General Jean said that doing so would truly become rebellion. The emperor stepped forward again. The prime minister had to drop his sword and beg the emperor to execute him. The prime minister's foolishness. The empress ordered the prime minister detained in a large cell. The next day, the emperor went to visit his brother. He demanded the prime minister bow before the empress. Only in this way could he preserve the prime minister's life. At the main afternoon court session, the empress stood in the middle. The emperor led the prime minister into the hall. Similarly, he begged the empress to spare the prime minister. This woman had forced even the emperor to plead with her. The emperor told the empress that the prime minister had agreed to be loyal to her. But the empress said she didn't need the prime minister's loyalty and demanded that the emperor. Pushed into a dilemma, the emperor said they should both leave. Losing both was better than having to choose. Hearing this, the empress finally softened her stance and became sorrowful. The prime minister returned home and asked General Jean to help him arrange a meeting with the empress. He wanted to kill the empress himself. When General Jean approached the empress said the same words to him as she did to General Jean. She requested him to arrange a meeting with the prime minister to end the conflict. The prime minister alone entered the grand hall without saying much and drew his sword directly. The prime minister realized he had fallen into a trap, but with his extensive battlefield experience, he was not afraid to fight alone against 10 enemies and push back. But at the moment he was about to break free, a knife stabbed through him. The person the prime minister trusted the most. All of this was for the emperor and the country, but in his belief, there was no room for the people. The emperor also arrived, embracing the prime minister and crying bitterly. This was the most loyal subject to him. The emperor had regained his spirit and looked towards the empress. The emperor asked the empress to kneel down and apologize and begged for forgiveness. She believed that the prime minister had executed the autocracy correctly and must be punished. On the other hand, the courtiers next to the emperor continued to speak ill of the empress. The emperor decided to banish the empress from the palace and send her to a temple for repentance. At the main afternoon court session, those who were loyal to the empress prepared to present to the emperor about welcoming the empress back. But before they could speak, the sword in the emperor's hand made them fearful. He demanded that everyone kneel down, regardless of whether they were previously loyal to the prime minister or the empress. The emperor, crazed, thought that these people, regardless of their past allegiances. The Empress Dowager arrived in time to stop the emperor. And the emperor turned to demand. The Empress Dowager was extremely surprised and asked her to take the emperor back. The Empress Dowager knew that she could not control the emperor, and the plan to change the emperor began to be implemented. But all of this could not be done without the involvement of the supporting role. The supporting role had begun to poison the emperor. This type of poison would make the emperor addicted and slowly destroy his organs. General Yuan came to see the emperor and gave him some books. Among them were records of the prime minister's plan to control the various races. He wanted to tell the emperor that the empress's removal of the prime minister. The emperor went to the temple and saw the empress repenting. During this time, the empress did not repent and still blamed the emperor. The emperor turned away, his health deteriorating. He wandered through the palace until he reached the empress. Memories suddenly rushed back of the woman who had saved his life, teaching him to read and becoming an unforgettable emperor. That night, he went to the temple where the empress was still repenting. He sneaked in and heard the empress praying for the emperor, praying for him to become a great emperor. He understood that the empress had not changed, she was still the woman of old. The emperor decided to welcome the empress back. Kim Hyle, the son of the former prime minister, led a group plotting to assassinate the emperor and the empress. The situation quickly turned against the emperor. Just then, a group of masked individuals appeared and rescued the emperor. Meanwhile, the empress also wielded a bow and arrow to defeat Kim Hyle. After the rebels were repelled, the emperor discovered that their savior was Wang Yiwu. Initially preparing to leave on horseback, the emperor suddenly turned back. He approached Kim Hyle's body. Kim Hyle, though weakened, still held onto the emperor and said, "Your eldest son was the child of Wang Yiwu and the empress, you have my sympathies." Learning that his lover had borne a child with another man, the emperor's first thought was to protect her. He went to the upper court, where rumors were abundant, and killed her. Later, while the empress slept, he personally led troops to intercept Wang Yiwu. Those most loyal to Wang Yiwu all perished in the battle. Holding a knife, Wang Yiwu asked the emperor why he wanted to kill him. The empress would. Wang Yiwu immediately understood the situation and requested the emperor to kill him. The emperor stabbed him, consumed by jealousy over a man who loved the empress more than him. That night, the empress arrived and found Wang Yiwu dead, crying bitterly. But in this cruel struggle for power, no one controlled their fate. The next day, after abandoning his deepest love, seeing everyone bow before her, seeing the emperor still cherish her, all struggles seemed to halt on this path. But not far away, she seemed to see the image of Wang Yiwu again. It was time to bid farewell. She had one last battle to fight. When she learned that the empress had become Empress Dowager, she became furious. She was determined to hasten the change of the emperor. The new emperor she chose was a distant relative, a wine and lust lover. On the other hand, the Empress Dowager continued to provide drugs to the emperor. Although it relieved his headaches, the emperor's memory deteriorated. One day, in severe pain, he smashed a bowl and held a shard after taking the medicine provided by the supporting role, to avoid falling asleep. At this time, a guard reported that the Empress Dowager invited him to discuss the emperor's abdication. The emperor finally realized that the supporting role was a traitor. The supporting role mocked the emperor. The emperor suddenly understood that they wanted to eliminate the empress first. To avoid arousing suspicion from the supporting role, the emperor continued to take the medicine provided by him. The emperor told the supporting role that he wanted more concubines. The supporting role intentionally suggests that the empress should take over power. The supporting role then says that there are too many people loyal to the empress in the court. The emperor presents some reasons to dismiss General Jean, who was recently promoted to prime minister, along with some other important figures. The empress thinks that the emperor is still stubborn as before. After the evening court ends, the emperor summons the queen and says he wants to issue a decree of abdication. He asks the queen who will succeed him. The queen names a distant relative, and the emperor dispels the last doubt in his heart. The successor is just a puppet of the queen. The royal physician unexpectedly comes to the empress and tells her that everything the emperor has done is for her. The emperor asks the royal physician to investigate the effects of the drug. The royal physician tells the emperor that the drug has destroyed all of the emperor's internal organs. Knowing all this, the empress immediately goes to find General Jean. General Jean tells the empress that the emperor has given him a secret order. The emperor will remove all obstacles for the empress and the crown prince. The next day, the queen's faction thinks they have secured victory. They wait for the emperor to announce the decree of abdication. And what he reads out is a declaration punishing the rebels. Immediately after, General Jean leads the guards to kill all the rebels present there. The supporting roles stand trial under the podium. The queen still blames the emperor for being enchanted. The emperor asks the supporting role. The supporting role says he never betrayed him, he was just loyal to money. He says the queen is just like them. If he wasn't the emperor, she wouldn't even look at him. The truth that the woman he loves may not love him is what the emperor least wants to face. He stabs the supporting role with a sword. After this evening court, the empress sends a bowl of poison to the queen. Then Yuan Dynasty began to retreat northward. The emperor's death also of the empress during the Battle of Tuongdian. The empress hugs the emperor tightly. From a palace maid rising to become empress, from using the emperor for revenge, to giving birth to a child to maintain the throne for him, she truly loved the emperor. But there was another man who came before him. There are things even as powerful as her couldn't control. Alright, the movie ends here. Take 3 seconds to subscribe to our channel to support us. Thank you for watching our channel. See you in the next movie.